Hello, welcome to Seconds Out Live. I'm Danny Flexen. I'm back in the hot seat, or rather sitting perched on my bed in sunny Rochester. Delighted to be joined by, who is this handsome stranger? Could it possibly be the long-lost brother of Ayman Khan? I don't know what's going on here.
I've had a small haircut, and Vinny, our videographer, back pulling all the strings, has gone crazy for it. So hopefully people in the chat don't go too hard on me. I know that we like the banter over here. I was just about to say to you, Danny, you've been on holiday, but it's your background that's caught a tan, not you. How does that work?
I'm just trying to level it out so we complement each other. Yeah, I like the hair. I do. And you've had a lot of stick about your hair over since we've been doing SO Live on the comments and stuff. So really, people can't complain now, surely, because they've got what they've been asking for a long time.
Well, one time I remember on a previous channel when I was first starting out, I was on camera for a live similar to this. Obviously not like the grand scale that we do it over here at Seconds Out Live. And someone put in the comments, "Oh, is that Ames? Good to see him on the photo. I'm going to download a picture of him, pull up my fireplace to tell my kids don't go near the fireplace." So hopefully this is a bit of an upgrade and don't get comments like that in the future.
Well, you've been endorsed by both myself and Modfather Vinny. So hopefully we're representative of the chat at large. Talking of the chat, please do get your likes in if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're edging ever close to 800,000 subs. So we're grateful for every single subscriber. But yeah, if you haven't already, please do join in and send us your comments and questions. We'll get through as many of those as we can in the allotted time. But the big subject is, of course, Ryan Garcia upsetting the odds, probably upsetting Devin Haney and his family as well. Originally at the weigh-in, by coming in a whopping 3 pounds overweight. Might not sound like a lot, certainly isn't for me. But for someone in the 10 stone or 140 pound division, it can make a difference, I believe. And so upset them there and then actually won the fight on the night, dropping Devin Haney 3 times, still only winning by majority decision, which may be controversial for some of the people out there. We'll talk about that. But we also want to talk about the fight, reflect on that, but talk about what's next for both men as well. But Ayman, first of all, unlike me, you stayed up for the fight. You watched it live. What did you make of it? You were pumped. You told me on the just after you finished watching it, you were pumped. You were getting content out. So I'm guessing you found it exciting.
Yeah, it was one of those moments really, because the build-up itself had been, something completely out of the ordinary. And there's a lot to discuss. I don't know how much we will go into it about the build-up and about maybe the ramifications of it, considering Garcia's behavior outside of the ring. But I mean, for now, focus on his behavior in the ring. It was so unexpected from myself and other people within the industry for Garcia to pull it off and in that manner, that it was just one of those moments where after watching that fight, and I was at the point where, the impartiality kind of goes out the window, and I was really kind of willing Garcia on to get that victory and get what he deserved there after really kind of building up that intrigue in the fight. And then that moment just got the adrenaline flowing. So there's no way I was sleeping, and it carried me over all the way into midday of that same Sunday night, a Sunday day even. So yeah, it was a thrilling fight. One of those moments where, look, part of the fights, especially the first maybe 6 rounds. Well, the first round was exciting, especially with the left hook that landed from Garcia onto Haney, where you thought, oh, the sign is right there that Garcia can get that success. But those first 6 rounds were a little bit boring, plus to adding to the referee into the mix, who was really kind of stifling a lot of the fight as well. But then when it exploded in that 7th round and onwards, yeah, it was just edgy your seat stuff. And if we see it again, great. But I can't wait to see Garcia back in the ring again.
Yeah, well, talking of that, because we're going to get the poll out nice and early, and I'll give my take on the fight in a minute. But Ryan Garcia next, he's called out Boots Ennis. Conor Benn's called him out, although there's a debate about where that fight can and will happen. And I did kind of send a message to Conor earlier today. He seems quite keen on the Ryan Garcia fight. And also a rematch with Haney, although Ryan ruled it out in the immediate aftermath of his win. Surely that's a possibility, although apparently there's no rematch clause. So the poll is pretty simple. Who would you like to see Ryan Garcia fight next? Devin Haney rematch, Conor Benn, Boots Ennis, or other? And if you pick other, please do comment who and why. So yeah, from my point of view, I didn't watch it live. So I knew the result before I watched it the next morning. And I was watching it up to, I guess, round 6 and thinking, I think I had Haney 4-2 up, and I could have seen 5-1 in fairness. And there was one kind of quite close round that was harder to call. And I thought something really crazy must happen in the second half of this fight, because it seemed like Haney was pretty much winning easily. You know, it's not like Ryan was putting on tons of pressure. You know, he rocked him in that first round, of course. But after that, Haney didn't seem in any trouble. That seemed to have been his warning sign. He was measuring the distance a lot better, either boxing him from the outside or getting really close up so he could bang away at the body. And I thought, if I'd have been watching this without knowing the result, I'd have expected Haney to canter to the finish line. I still would have watched the remaining 6 rounds, I'm sure, but it seemed like it'd be quite a perfunctory victory for him. And then the first knockdown, I'm not sure Haney ever completely recovered from it. You know, great shot, and just seemed dazed from then on in, including in the corner when he was receiving instructions, when he was in exchanges. Obviously, the holding on Haney's side became more and more as time went on. I thought the point deduction for Garcia without a warning previously was unfair. But even with that, I still had Garcia winning, I think, by 2 points at the end. So the knockdowns kind of outweighing that point deduction, I suppose, overall. But without the knockdowns, Haney probably would have had a good case to win. But obviously, that's irrelevant now. Yeah, never seemed able to avoid that left hook, Ryan's most potent punch. I saw someone on Twitter, I can't remember which, it was a fighter, but I can't remember who it was, that said, you know, what was wrong with Devin Haney? That's Ryan's only real weapon, and it was the only thing he had to avoid, and he couldn't. I just think he got caught, you know, unfortunately for him, in that earlier knockdown, round 7, was it, the first knockdown? And I think after that, he was a bit dazed and confused and apprehensive, and I think that ruined his game plan. He was in a nice rhythm before that first knockdown, and after that, it was pretty much all Garcia. And Haney showed great heart, great guts to stay in the fight, and you know, could easily have stayed on the floor for, you know, at least 2 of those 3 knockdowns. But for Garcia, I saw Dave Coldwell say this earlier, you've got to kind of temper the praise for a monumental victory against the odds with the fact that he did come in 3 pounds overweight. And I know people say, yeah, but, you know, Devin Haney, he rehydrates 25 pounds or more at times and has done it in previous fights. That's true, but it's not just about how big they were on the night and how much of an impact they had. It's also if one fighter, I don't want to say killed themselves because it's not the best words to use, but one fighter struggled desperately to make the weight and put in all the effort and drained themselves to an extent in training camp to do so. And the other fighter probably hasn't trained quite so hard, especially if they always planned in the Garcia camp to come in a bit heavy and, you know, made that foolish bet, as it turned out, to fork over some of his purse as a result. Haney keeps hold of the WBC title. I've seen a bit of consternation about that. It's not completely unheard of for that to happen. I know it hasn't in the past in some WBC title fights, but it has for other sanctioning bodies. The title usually is only on the line for the fighter who makes the championship weight. Although in this case, normally what you would expect, if the fighter loses, they would vacate or have the title taken from them. But I suppose the flip side of that is Haney did not lose to another fighter at 140 pounds. So there is a justifiable case for saying he shouldn't lose the belt as a result. It hasn't been proved beyond doubt that he's not the best fighter in the world at 140 pounds, as his only defeat is to someone who came in at 143. But yeah, I think you have to balance it up. Full credit to Ryan Garcia if he did indeed fool us all in the build-up. I'm not sure how much of that part is true. I think there were perhaps some wobbles and some questions regarding his mental health beforehand. And I don't think him going out and winning the fight eradicates all of that. But he does deserve credit for putting on the best performance of his career and for winning the fight. It's just a shame there will always be an asterisk, in my view, attached to it because of the weight issue. But let's go to the chat and see what some of you guys are saying. Obviously, the poll's up now as well, so please do vote in that. The chat's moving so fast. Too fast for me. Too fast for Devin Haney. So Rasetti says Devin didn't stick to his game plan round 2 to 6, but he was trying to be like Tank. Tank fans, prove everybody right on the 20th. DB Cooper 1, afternoon chaps. I see Flexen's back from his holiday in Grimsby, aptly named. Ayman's hair looks sturdy as Haney's flimsy fabric boots. You were never going to convince DB Cooper 1, Ayman, to be fair. Gary says, Ryan Garcia has known Devin Haney for 10, 15 years. Obviously, they were famously 3-3 in the amateur days. Mind games, fighting styles, etc. Familiarity complex works well. Haney couldn't weight bully this time. Ivan Romero wants Ryan Garcia to fight Isar Cruz next. Major League says tank, but no guidelines. Gary goes on, Haney was winning the rounds, but not the fight. Garcia knew he had Haney after the first round. I'm not sure that's true. I think he knew he could hurt Haney after the first round. I'm not sure he felt the fight was in the bag because he certainly didn't put any additional pressure on for the next 4 rounds or 5 rounds. Simon Brandy, Garcia against anyone but Haney. Same result or worse. Lopez, Tank, etc. are going to be lining up to have a go on Haney. No chin, no pop. Bit harsh. I wouldn't say he's got no chin. I know we've seen him wobble previously by Jorge Linares and others, but I don't think you get up from those knockdowns against Ryan Garcia if you've got no chin. The Contrarian says Haney gets knocked out in a rematch, 6 rounds, but presumably given his name, he'll say the opposite in a few minutes. Who else? Sultan Ibragimov, glad to have you back. Says outside the rounds, Garcia scored knockdowns. How many rounds did you have him winning? I had the rounds. I'm trying to remember now. I think I had the round 6-all at the end. So how many's that? I mean, he scored knockdowns in what, 3 separate rounds, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had him winning 3 rounds outside of the knockdowns, 3 rounds with the knockdowns. Haney the other 6, and then obviously the extra 2 points or 2 points deducted for the knockdowns and the 1 point for the point deduction. So yeah, it worked out 2-point victory on my completely irrelevant card. G-Day Akindajoy, definitely butchered that, says Ryan threw punches really fast. You need to have good reflexes to see it coming. Sultan Ibragimov, Paul Smith was equally overweight versus Ward. Yeah, but he didn't win the fight, Sultan. I don't know if you've seen it. It was one of my favourites to watch back. Sultan Ibragimov, the moment Devin accepted Ryan coming in overweight, it became equal footing. I don't think that's true. I mean, if someone said, yeah, he's going to be 3 pounds overweight and you're still confident of winning and you're going to get an extra $1.5 million in your purse, I don't think that means, you've just accepted the fact that it's a fair victory if the person beats you. I assume Devin and his team thought they'd still win the fight. And I think in large part they were in the early rounds. But, these things happen. I just don't think you can say, yeah, great victory for Ryan Garcia and just completely pretend like he wasn't overweight. I don't want to go to people that we haven't read out already. Daryl, 1967. Devin got smoked. Nothing to do with weight. Okay. Johnny B says WBC is a joke. I think we've seen examples of this sort of thing from a lot of the governing bodies, not just the WBC. That doesn't mean I'm disagreeing with you on this particular thing. JBGA says Pitbull is a threat to anyone. That's Isar Cruz, of course. M. Lopez likes that idea too. He says Ryan Garcia versus Pitbull Cruz live from LA will be a huge event. So it seems like perhaps we shouldn't have had other. We should have just had Isar Cruz. But we'll see how the final poll results turn out. But yeah, Ayman, you talked about the build-up to the fight. And yeah, I want to get your kind of take on that because is it the case that Ryan Garcia had us all fooled in that, his mental health was completely fine. He was saying all the right things to stoke interest in the fight and maybe cause a bit of, underestimating him from the Devin Haney team? Or is he now playing down the mental health concerns because it has worked out all right on the night?
Yeah, I think I do think there were issues surrounding Ryan Garcia heading into this fight. Whether he was able to pull off the victory or not was what we're going to have to deal with after the fight. People were saying that might have been an excuse ready-made for the loss. It didn't turn out to be that way anyways. But look, I think I'm happy to stand here and be fooled as such as it was, as everyone else seems to be heading into the fight. I know there's been a lot of comments about, us boxing fans being armchair psychologists looking at Ryan Garcia and saying that he shouldn't be heading into the fight at the weekend. And I still kind of feel the same way in that, I feel that the word wasn't the question being asked as to whether Ryan Garcia was mentally fit and stable for that fight this weekend, regardless of whether he came through with the victory or not. Now, there's 2 schools of thought on it, and at least from my experiences, is one that if you say you're fit and you enter the fight, then you're essentially declaring yourself fit for that. But there's teams, there's people around you, there are people around you to assess you to say that whether you are or not fit to do that. I just wonder whether that was being done from the commission, from the promoter, from the promoters, from the family, from others, especially when you've seen some of the Twitter tirades, some of the content of what is being said as well. I do think, and when you also take into the fact that this is a guy who did declare himself as having and had taken a mental health break in his career because he was suffering from problems, you have to factor that into the context. And one of those things that you've got as well, which is sort of unsavory, I think, which maybe we can discuss on another day. I don't think we quite have the time to go into it in full. Is it acceptable for a fighter in this day and age now who is considered a real influencer, not one of these fake influencers where you get 1,000 followers these days and you're an influencer now and you can sell an advert for £50 or whatever it is on your Twitter or whatever. But this is a guy who has millions and millions of followers, millions of young followers as well too, who in sport, this is what this is sport. I know we talk about boxing as a business and entertainment, but this is sport at the end of the day. You don't see the likes of Federers and others in other, I can pull out many a sport and many a name, leading figures in names. You don't see the likes of these doing these sort of things to get edges over opponents. This is sport where you're going along the lines of saying that it's okay to characterize yourself as someone who is in need of help, who is someone who needs to, have that conversation, who needs assessment, who needs, maybe needs that pat on the shoulder from someone to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. You're characterizing mental health in some form, addiction, in some form, erratic behavior in some form has been acceptable to use to promote a fight, to sell as a product. And that's a very uncomfortable conversation that I think people need to have in the wake of this, as opposed to just looking at Ryan Garcia's achievement here in the wake of us not really knowing as to what the case was. So there is still that cloud there, and that conversation does still need to be had. So yeah, kind of, whilst I was thoroughly entertained, and I will say that for the other side of it, I was thoroughly entertained by the outcome of it all and the entertainment on the night. There was definitely that uncomfortability of what we'd seen beforehand, and I still feel that Ryan Garcia was detrimented going into this fight because of his mental health. And that's the other side of the thing as well too. When we're talking about the weight, the Haney team were, for me at least, I can't speak for them, but it seemed like they were comfortable in knowing taking this as a bit of a pick of taking a fighter who was maybe ready for the taking there, because they didn't have their preparation fully 100%, because they were maybe going through a few things. So on the other side of the coin, I agree with that commenter that was saying that, like, well, they've accepted that £3 now, they've taken the money, that's the bargain there. So I don't quite see the asterisk on that side. And to be fair, Haney doesn't seem to be too complaining about that too much. I know he made a comment on Twitter about it.
Haney, though, is it? This is what I mean. I'm not saying Haney can use that as an excuse. I'm saying that boxing fans, pundits, historians, there is a kind of asterisk attached to the victory, I think.
I do what you're saying, but for me, I don't see too much of an asterisk for it, and maybe that's once the dust has settled, maybe that asterisk will grow in time. But yeah, just rounding up my thoughts on this, I still feel it was very much uncomfortable watching and listening to Ryan Garcia. He said to our very own Brady Raheem that the crazy antics are kind of over. So hopefully, if that means Ryan Garcia gets his mind right, brilliant. If that means Ryan Garcia stops using mental health to a degree as a way to sell his fight in a negative way, as I seem to perceive it, then that's even better as well too. But I'm hoping to see more of a stable looking Ryan Garcia in future fights.
Yeah, I mean, we're always being told regarding mental health that, people have breakdowns, people attempt suicide in the worst cases. And then you'll have people afterwards saying, yeah, but, they seemed fine. Their social post indicated everything was all right with them. There's nothing to worry about. Surely there's a flip side of that. If Ryan Garcia is now saying, yeah, none of it was true, I was actually fine, but I fooled you all, that doesn't mean it's true, does it? That's the projection. That's what he wants us to believe now. Because in his mind, he probably is a lot happier now that he's got the biggest win of his career. That doesn't mean that he was never struggling with mental health. And I think, yeah, as you say, I think those conversations still need to happen. Kid Addison, Texas says, you don't get knocked down with a strong chin. They should call the fight. Referee sucked. There are a few separate issues there. Perhaps in some ways, the referee certainly did suck. But you don't get knocked down with a strong chin. I mean, who are we saying has got a strong chin over the years? Cole Froch, famously strong chin. He got knocked down a couple of times. Chris Eubank Jr. obviously had a strong chin. He got stopped by Liam Smith. Chris Eubank Sr., notably strong chin. He got knocked down a few times as well. I don't think people get knocked down because they're off balance. People get knocked down in fights when they're weight drained. There's lots of different reasons. I'm not saying any of those apply to Devin Haney, but I'm saying that if you've got good recuperative powers, Tyson Fury being a good example, I don't think you can necessarily be called chinny, but that's just me. Who else have we got? Ernie Arias says Ryan is far better. DB Cooper 1. This fight was like Man United versus Liverpool. Doesn't matter if United are 10th and Liverpool first. It's a big fight with history where anything can happen. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch for me, but okay. Simon Brandy, Garcia is undeniably a bit crazy. That's not how we would refer to mental health struggles, just to say. But he is also an expert troll. His no diddy bars are hilarious. Yeah, but I think that's where the lines can get blurred. You know, the fact that he is kind of smart in terms of manipulating the public perception and being a genuine influencer, as Ayman said earlier, mixed with the fact that he probably does have mental health struggles. And we know he has in the past because of that long break he took. Leo says, Haney was too predictable. He might have won the early rounds, but only landed one decent shot. Garcia's explosive style exposed Haney and his left shook him up, and Haney never recovered after the 6th. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty accurate take. Leo adds it was an enjoyable fight. And now we should talk about the future for both men, although I haven't seen much speculation on social media about who Haney should fight next. Well, I did see someone post saying he doesn't favour him against anyone now at 140 except, who was it? It wasn't Esau Cruz, I don't think. Or maybe it was. It wasn't Rolly. But yeah, they were basically writing him off against a lot of fighters at 140, including Matthias, because, you know, they now believe he has got a fragile chin and doesn't have enough power to keep fighters off. So, Ayman, let's start with Haney before probably quite quickly moving on to Garcia's future. But what do you think Haney does next? He's still got the belt, of course.
I think he needs a bit of a bounce back fight, really, just to get that win back, get the positive spin back for him, get the confidence back in him as well, show himself as being, you know, a competent, a high IQ fighter, as maybe he didn't show in this fight against Ryan Garcia, who he'd known for a number of years and fought a number of times heading into this fight. I think he probably needs one of those type of fights. He showed interest a while back, I think, in fighting Maxi Hughes, and he's looking for those big opportunities. I think that might be the bounce back fight for him. Someone who's durable, good fighter. Over here in the UK, we know him as well. He'll give him rounds, and eventually I think Haney will look good in getting the win over Maxi. So that's the type of fight that I think maybe they were looking for. I think they were planning for a Sandor Martin fight, but I think against someone like Sandor, who's a very good boxer in himself and has caused upsets against, or at least caused problems against another of these of this generation's top talents. I just think that's too much of a tricky, you know, boxing type of fight where I do think Haney wins, but it's not like a good win for him in that sense. So I wouldn't look for anything on that note for Devin Haney right now. I'd probably look for something like a Maxi Hughes type of level fighter just to get that confidence back up and get the win back before you head back into calling out for rematches. I'm
sure Maxi will appreciate you putting his name in the hat for, but then I'd say he's got a chance of an upset as well. So yeah, if Devin Haney's watching, I didn't mean it. Fight Maxi Hughes. Just give him the chance. DB Cooper 1 says, here's another comparison for you, Flex, and it reminds me of Billum Smith versus Okoli. One guy was the star, but he faced an opponent from the amateurs who knew them inside out. Did Billum Smith and Okoli fight as amateurs?
Don't
I think so. I thought he just knew him inside out because they'd shared so many rounds sparring. A better comparison, DB Cooper 1, I'm going to give this one to you for free, would be James DeGale against George Groves, who were former amateur opponents and hated rivals, but one ascended to the very top level of the unpaid side of the game, and one didn't. But it was the one who didn't, who knew DeGale so well, knew how to push his buttons mentally, and knew how to beat him in the ring. Major League says, Ryan would have made weight if he would have took off the LeBrons. They are 2 pounds itself. Shoes are truly heavy. Kind of went into it. This is like a Deontay Wilder excuse, except Garcia won. After the bet, Haney wanted him to be overweight. Gary says, Sandor Martin versus Haney is a stinker. Wow.
I agree.
Simon Brandy says, when Loma beats Cambosos, Haney should give Loma a deserved rematch. Yeah, that's not a bad shout. Jaden Kitoko says, bro, 3.2 pounds is just over 1.4 kilograms. Thanks, Jaden. We needed a mathematician in the chat. I mean, we're not saying it's a lot of weight, but for people who compete in weight classes that are only separated by, 7 pounds, that's halfway to the next weight class up, isn't it? That's halfway between junior welter and welter. Keep the change and your filthy comparisons, Flex, and didn't ask. Joke, don't ban me, says DB Cooper 1. We never ban you, DB Cooper 1. You're one of the OGs of this live show. Sultan Ibrahimov, how much a factor did Devin's previous weight bullying affect him? Seemed he was killing himself to have a size advantage. Going up now, his body it may have taken a toll on his body. Yeah, it's a very good point. You know, we know from previous fighters, Ricky Hatton obviously blew up between fights and then had to get back to 140 a lot of the time. Roy Jones going up to heavyweight and then having to come back to light heavy. Chris Bird, you know, going down in weight late in his career as well. There's a number of examples where messing around with your weight and really crunching down to get to that number has proved a problem longer term. So, yeah, we wait to see how it affects Haney. But arguably the more exciting side of this coin is Ryan Garcia and his future. Immediately after the fight, speaking to us, among other reporters, he said he doesn't want a rematch with Haney. We don't believe there is a rematch clause. And he actually wants to fight with Jaron Boots Ennis. I don't know if that's something that's been talked about previously, but it surprised me a little bit because no one seems to really be calling Boots out. He has got a world title, of course, a weight up. And Ryan, as we know, didn't win a world title in the Haney fight. So this gives him a chance for a legit world title up at 147, a weight that may suit King Riot a bit more. But yeah, Boots Ennis only just signed with Matchroom. Probably a fight he fancies, naturally bigger guy. Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see it. I'm not sure we will see it. It just seems like Garcia's now a genuine superstar coming off this win. And we'd like to see him in something a bit bigger, perhaps, you know. Rematch with Tank Davis, perhaps, if a weight can be agreed for that. I think that's quite sellable at this point. I know that Conor Benn has put his hat in the ring. Those two, him and Garcia, were going back and forth on social media last night. Garcia saying he'd like it to be over in England. He'll come over to England to beat Ben, as Mario Barrios told me about Ben not too long ago. So they all the fighters seem to want Conor Benn over here. But then Ryan Garcia made the point that Conor Benn can't fight in the UK at the moment. And that's something that Eddie Hearn told us last week is still waiting to be finalised one way or the other, what exactly is going to be Conor Benn's next move. A lot of people in the chat asking for Esau Pitbull Cruz against Garcia next time out. What would you like to see him do, Ayman?
Yeah, I mean, Boots' fight doesn't really bring much clamour to it, although Ryan Garcia was kind of stating he'd want that. But Ryan Garcia was also stating before and that he wanted Sebastian Fundora, which is a very interesting clash of sizes, as it usually is with Sebastian Fundora. He's also been in a big win himself against Tim Tszyu. But casting that aside, both Fundora and Boots aside, I think there's great options for Garcia, depending on what weight he wants to continue at. That weight has obviously been a point of contention pre-fight and at the weigh-in, and now it's a point of contention for him going forward as to what his next steps are in the future. I think people like to see that rematch eventually with Gervonta Davis. I'd love to see that. Depends where Gervonta sees his future as well, at what weight. Isaac Cruz sounds like a great fight to me, always brings the action. A rematch with Devin Haney, I think, will happen, although Garcia is kind of dismissing it right now. I don't think he truly is dismissing it forever. I think that's the type of fight that you build back with a couple of years in between the last one. Teofimo Lopez, again, another good fight. I think bounce from a promotion. From the way you promoted this fight, you need to keep the steam rolling. You need to keep the hype generated. And there's a good fight and a good possibility to, it won't be as good a fight, but it'll be definitely as good a promotion. And that will be against Adrian Broner at welterweight. If that's Ryan Garcia's next move, I'd like to see maybe Broner get one last shot at the big time, and that being a big promotion in the future between Garcia and Broner. But there's also another added ingredient to this as well. And that is what the Saudi influence might be looking at this scene and what they want. Because right now they're pulling the strings, and it seems like they've had their meetings with Boots, they've had the meetings with Al Heyman, they had the meetings with De La Hoya's and other such in the world, and they've got the money to really kind of bend the ear of any promoter and make whatever fight they want to, bend the ear of any organization, as now the WBC have allowed.
But they won't give Tank his 2 Ferraris.
Well, I'm sure he'll get his 2 Ferraris.
He might get one. You know,
might get 1 and 1 if he wins the fight. But the WBC have cleared their rules to allow Bivol and Beterbiev to fight for the undisputed. So they've really got the power here to dictate and choose if they want to get into the mix as to who fights who. So that's an outside kind of factor into any of these fighters and any of these fights as to what their future is. But I think most likely for Garcia, I think he moves up. I think he moves up to welterweight and he continues on his career there, possibly in against the likes of Broner and maybe a Haney rematch in the future.
Sultan and Madrimov says Ryan versus Teofimo Lopez, of course. Not one I thought about, but yeah, I'd be in for that. DeMonte Newman, going back to the fight, says Devin didn't box well. I don't know if it was the round 1 days or what, but it just seemed Haney's chin couldn't handle the power. He was conditioned, though. Yeah, I think either in the first round when he got rocked or in the 6th round when he got, 7th round when he got dropped for the first time. I don't think he ever fully recovered. He had a kind of glassy-eyed look after that, in my opinion. Johnny B says, we need a rematch. It's 7-6 in favour of Ryan. It wasn't 6-all in the amateurs. They fought 6 times. It was 3-all. So I think that's what you're getting at. So it's 4-3 in favour of Ryan. So I think anything can happen in the rematch. But in my opinion, I don't think Garcia will give Haney a rematch. Well, he's in the driver's seat, isn't he? He was already a bigger draw than Devin Haney. He's just helped Devin Haney to not only the biggest purse of his career, but also an extra $1.5 million after failing to make the weight. Probably thinks he's done enough for Devin Haney at this point. Although, yeah, I thought it was quite an entertaining fight, especially the final 6 rounds. So I'd be happy to watch a rematch. Sultan Ibrahimov says, was Ben only allowed to fight in the States because his ban was lifted? Does losing the appeal means the ban could be reinforced? Would that mean a global ban? I think it'll be decided on a commission by commission basis in the States. I would imagine, UCAD certainly holds some sway. And if they reimpose the ban, which hasn't been confirmed, all that's been confirmed is that the decision to lift the suspension was wrong. That doesn't mean it's automatically reimposed, I don't think. I think we're all waiting for answers on that. Mm-hmm. But then it is a case of state by state, which commissions will abide by what UCAD is asking and which will go their own way. But I imagine that Ben will still be able to fight somewhere, but very unlikely to be in the UK anytime soon, I wouldn't think. Simon Brandy confirming Ayman's dream. Broner called out Haney. So could happen. Johnny B, in the rematch, Garcia needs to make weight. That's the whole reason there's weight classes. And I think Garcia cheated. He looked huge compared to Haney. Yeah, I mean, cheated's a bit strong because they could have pulled out of the fight.
Yep.
They could have said, yep, you're cheating. It's not going to happen. They didn't. They accepted the money and they went ahead with the fight at a catch weight. And the title wasn't on the line. So everyone kind of got what they wanted. I don't think we can say he cheated now because he won, unless we were thinking he cheated previously when he just didn't make weight. It wasn't a blackmail thing, was it? He didn't have to take the fight. All I would say is there's question marks surrounding the victory, but I can't say he cheated. I don't think that's fair. Sultan Ibrahimov, Ryan bet on himself to win and won $12 million, so the fine was a drop in the ocean. Yeah, it's fair enough, but I mean, even with 3 knockdowns, he still came close to not winning. So it's a risky little game to put a friend's reference in. Simon Brandy, Garcia versus Lopez is a good fight and even better build-up. Hatman suggested that fight. Well, if Hatman suggested it. DB Cooper 1, didn't several big USA commissions publicly say a while back they wouldn't license him, Conor Bennis is, while suspended? If it happens, I hope they stick to their word. Yeah, that may be the case, but you know what it's like in the US because of federalism, because the states have all their own rules. There's always going to be at least one state that will break ranks and do it for the money and for the, the fame and the dollars that they're going to get for it. You can't expect any different because there isn't an overriding, there is the Association of Boxing Commissions, but they don't often work in harmony. So, it's just the game the way it is. Johnny B, oh, come on, Broner's finished. He's just looking for a payday. Yeah, I don't think Ayman's denying that. I think he's saying give him the payday. Just like I'm saying give Maxie Hughes a payday, although I'm not saying Maxie's finished, by the way. But yeah, just before we move on to our next topic away from Saturday's show, so Vin Meister, don't change the headline just yet. Just a quick comment on the undercard and particularly was it the chief support, Arnold Barbosa, getting a benefit of what seemed a ludicrous decision against Sean McComb. Should have been the biggest win of Sean McComb, his coming out party over in the US. Ayman, can you make any case for Barbosa winning that fight?
No, not really. I mean, to be honest, I have to be, show you my full deck here, as it were. Deck, I said, not anything else.
Yeah, please don't.
I didn't really score the fight as I was going, but for me, when I was watching it, it looked like Sean McComb was winning the rounds. It's just one of those things where, from maybe the team, like, have you given yourself enough when you know what you're in for? When you're away on foreign soil, you're not the home fighter. Arnold Barboza Jr. is someone they're trying to build. So if you're not looking to knock a prospect off their perch, did you really kind of do that? And I'm not saying that you have to do that. I'm not one of those guys, but I'm just saying when it comes to being in this situation, that's what's kind of looked for. As well, you're over in America where judges tend to favor the front forward fighters pushing the action, and Sean McComb was boxing brilliantly off of the back foot. So
What
I'm
was
not
a
saying
worse decision? This one in favor of Barboza or the one in favor of Cambosos against Maxi Hughes?
probably I think Maxi Hughes was a lot more comprehensive in the way he won the fight. I think for me, Sean McCoon, whilst he did win the rounds, I don't think he won rounds really a lot wider like how Maxi won it for me anyways. So I probably tip the hat to that one there. But yeah, no, I side with Sean McCoon here. I think it was a bad result for him. And I don't think he did himself any favors as well with the optics too. I think in these situations, you gotta look pissed off. Like, it might be in his demeanor to be respectful, and you're taught to shake hands with your opponent and stuff. And I know one time my one of my favorite fighters, Golovkin, stormed out the ring against Canelo when he didn't get the result, and people really kind of laid in on him when he did that. But I think that's what you got to do. And Sean McComb kind of went over to Barboza and raised his hand, and he was the crowd were in his favor. The crowd were booing Barboza. He could have really played into that and really pushed his side for it. So I hope he does the rounds with the interviews and pushes for it afterwards, or Golden Boy have promised him something in return, because Barboza Jr. won't be wanting the rematch. He's just saying, look, it wasn't my best night. I got the victory and I'm moving on to bigger and better things. So you kind of miss your own opportunity there as well in the aftermath by not blowing your trumpet as you were both in fight and then post fight afterwards.
Okay, so moving on from Saturday night, cue Mod Father Vinny with the headline change. Matchroom announced, I think it was over the weekend, just before the Haney fight or just before the show began, that there would be a press conference in New York on Wednesday to announce a major fight, but clouded it in secrecy over who and what was at stake. We think, although we're not absolutely certain, but we think it's going to be to announce Terence Crawford's bid to become a 4-weight world champion, the recent undisputed welterweight champion and a former undisputed light welterweight, super lightweight champion, moving up to 154 to take on Israel Madrimov for the WBA super welterweight title, which, when you consider Crawford won his first world title at 135, would make him a 4-weight world champion. Crawford's fought some of the best fighters around in the divisions he's gone through. Madrimov, maybe not the best fighter at 154, although I don't know. Tim Tszyu losing to Sebastian Fundora, as we talked about earlier, maybe he is the number one now at 154. You've got obviously Jamel Charlo there as well, if he decides to come back and fight in that weight class. I know there was some talk about him potentially blocking the Crawford-Madrimov fight, but we assume that is what's being announced on Wednesday. And looking at the styles of the two fighters, and Crawford, you would think not the same fighter necessarily as super welter as he has been at the lighter weight classes. He won't be the bigger man in the ring on the night. Quite an exciting prospect, that fight. What do you make of it, Ayman, if it is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an exciting fight for us in the boxing industry. I don't think it quite relates over, especially in the wake of Garcia Haney. I don't think it quite translates over to being a big occasion as recent Crawford fights have been. But it's a good fight in prospects, especially when you factor in like Crawford, at least at the highest levels of his career, or at least the recent levels and years of his career, hasn't fought a style like Madrimov has had, that real kind of solid, grounded in the amateur foundations of boxing. And he's really kind of been able to cross that over into the professional ranks really well. And he carries a punch as well, too. He looked brilliant against Kurbanov, who, look, we knew with Kurbanov that he was a fighter who was probably ready for a loss, considering he's fought his fights over in Russia, and some of his high-profile fights, especially the one against Liam Smith, he probably deserved to lose. Maybe Liam will kick. Well, I know Liam does kick himself for not pressing on the gas a little bit more, and maybe taking that fight over in Russia. Maybe knew who's up there for the setup a little bit there. But yeah, no, he's. I can't remember apart from. Yeah, I can't really remember a point in Madrimov's career so far where I've watched him fight where he's faltered. If anyone can remind me, then feel free to do it in in the chat. But I mean, to be fair as well, you've got to kind of look at Madrimov's career and say, has he really fought some of the top names heading into his world title win? Probably not. He's had an easy ride of it so far. So jumping up for him to all the way up to Terence Crawford, who's one of the pound for pound best and maybe number one for many, is quite a steep jump considering the levels that he's been fighting at. So maybe you would want him to fight someone at super welterweight who also had a belt, rather than just getting or taking on Madrimov, taking on Kurbanov, sorry for the belt. But I also think that on the other side, Madrimov somewhat avoided. So I think a lot of fighters were probably looking at this in the super welterweight division, saying, "Oh well, if Crawford comes in and deals with Madrimov, I can then avoid Madrimov myself because he'll have already taken off a loss, and there's even less in it for me to take on Madrimov." But I remember going back years back, and it was heading into, well, not that many years, but 2020. And I remember asking Eddie who he thought would be this decade's, fighter of the decade, or some question around that. And Eddie said, and Eddie's pick was, to be fair, Eddie had just signed Madrimov at this point, so he's gonna say and promote his fighter in Madrimov. But his pick was Madrimov, and he didn't say anyone else added to that. So those are big. That was a big promotion for, and a big, doff of the cap for Eddie to say that. We'll see if Madrimov lives up to that potential, but he's up against one of the pound greats, and you have to side with Crawford heading into it, despite the weight disparity.
Yeah, I mean, someone in Bragimov in the chat says Madrimov's defense is quite leaky. And it might be a case of, who was it? Pernell Whitaker, when he went up to 154. I think it was Julio Cesar Vasquez. Correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. I think that might have been WBA belt as well. But again, if I'm wrong, please do correct me. But that was for him to become a multi-weight world champion. And he was undersized, but by far the better boxer, more accurate. And he boxed. He wasn't overly aggressive, but still scored a number of knockdowns, maybe 4 in that fight, and dropped back down, I think, to 147 afterwards. And I wonder if that's what Crawford's planning, or if he's going to stay up at 154 and try and unify there as well. I don't think there's been, in the 4-belt era, certainly, a 3 division. I mean, there's only, I'm not sure there's been a 2 division apart from Crawford. So, yeah, 3 division undisputed champion. To do that, he'd have to get through the likes of Fundora and Charlo, potentially, if he returns to the weight. But yeah, so it's an interesting one in that sense. I think Crawford's picked someone who he feels will suit him style-wise. And there's nothing wrong with that. He certainly earned that right. But will he stay at 154? And also, is this his weight ceiling? So whether he stays there or he drops back down, could you see him going up any higher than that? Are there any opponents with titles or big fights at 160, for example, that you'd give Crawford a decent chance of winning? Because he's talked about fighting Canelo before, hasn't he, at 168? Mm-hmm. And I don't want to see that. But is there anyone at 160 where you'd fancy him to win at that weight?
Well, at the moment, 160 isn't the division that it used to be going back a few years when Golovkin and Canelo were, the top stars in the division. That those stars have really kind of vacated now, moved on with their careers, sort of semi-retired in the case of Golovkin or Canelo, who's moved on to bigger and better things. So there's definitely an opportunity right now to really seize the moment at middleweight for the current fighters in the division. Whether that's still the case when Crawford, if he does get there, or decides to get there, whether that's still the case is another thing. But looking at it right now, you can't really see that big kind of, I can't really pinpoint one of those fighters that I really kind of see as he's head and shoulders above everyone else. Right now, that stands to be Janibek, and I think he's a very good fighter. But had we had the likes of Canelo and Golovkin, in their primes in this division right now, I don't think he'd be holding a title. Erislandy Lara as well as someone who's aging, although he still looks great and the power seems to be coming with him. I think Crawford would fancy his chances in that fight. If he doesn't have problems against Madrimov, he'd fancy his chances against Alim Kanuli, who again grounded in that sort of level of foundation with good technical boxing, but also a good puncher. I think if Crawford comes through Madrimov unscathed, I think he'll fancy himself against Alim Kanuli, and then you got the likes of Carlos Adames as well, fighters who I feel he'd have the beating of. Hamza Shiraz and Amma Williams as well coming through as some of the younger crop. You still favour respectfully Crawford, so I think there's definitely that opportunity there for Crawford to maybe go up to middleweight, where maybe he wouldn't have the size advantage, but in terms of being the boxing ability, he'd be leagues above what's currently there right now. So I think there is a possible future for him at middleweight.
And there's the fact as well that if he picks up a belt or more at 154 and then again at middleweight, people might start taking a Canelo fight more seriously at 168. It might not seem so far-fetched, and Canelo himself might start taking an interest, because Canelo's a lot of things, but he's not a, 4 or 5 weight world champion, I don't think, just yet. What's he done? He's done, light heavy, super middle. Did he start off at super world? Was that his first world title? So 4, yeah. So Crawford will equal him if he wins one at 54, but it will surpass him if he then wins one at 160. And, it's a lot of ifs, of course. But, yeah, maybe that does make the fight more likely, more sellable. I don't know. Because you're obviously thinking, yeah, middleweight's not as good as it was, and I completely agree with you. But if Crawford were to face Janibek in his next fight at 160, I think I'd probably edge towards Janibek. I think there's got to be a time, and there's got to be a weight, where it becomes more about the size than the opponent. And I think for Crawford, maybe that's not 154, but surely it's 160. Maybe not. I don't know.
Sorry, I know you're going to the chat, and we'll get to the chat in a second, but when you've seen Janibek falter, especially to Denzel Bentley, Denzel Bentley, great fighter, but going into that fight, I still think you'd say it as well too. You would have favoured Janibek to shown the levels there, and he didn't. When you've seen those moments with Janibek, there's definitely a big asterisk for me in terms of him and his career and how good of a fighter he is. I think Crawford might look to that and feel there's an opportunity there. And as well, the other side of it is Canelo really that interested, even if he wins those belts, even if Crawford gets those accomplishments, because Canelo's been saying that, look, people, when I fight Benavidez, they say things about it. People, when I say I have these wins, they say, oh, it was just the weight. Oh, it was just this. Oh, it was just that. Is that another fight that he thinks that if he takes it, look, there'll be money there, but I don't need money. I want the accolades. I want the legacy here. Is that really there for him? Canelo might not see it there.
You mentioned going to the chat, but it's just some compliments for us. So it's going to look really bad now. But Massive Coconuts, who's got a lovely picture of Steve Carell, says, I've missed you, Danny, looking refreshed and slightly tanned. I think the slightly tanned is the orange hue that always seems to emanate from this room. Not quite sure how it happens. It might be the light bulb. It might be the wallpaper. I mean, the wallpaper's not orange, obviously. That would make it a lot easier to work out. Big Chungus replies to Massive Coconut saying, I can't believe I just said Big Chungus replies to Massive Coconuts. I mean, what are we doing here? Says, I was just thinking that he looks great. Ayman does as well. And then Massive Coconut says, Ayman is always looking good. There you go. You were worried, weren't you? You were nervous, insecure about the fresh trim, and almost universal approval in the chat.
I was slightly sweating over here, and you guys have made me feel really welcome.
I'm slightly sweating over here due to my massive tan, apparently. So, but yeah, moving on from that, we'll see how impressed someone else is with Ayman and myself when we move on to our next segment. And that will probably be Ben Shalom, because we're going to talk a little bit about the pattern. I think it's fair at this point to call it a pattern of fighters pulling out of negotiations from Boxxer to take on their Matchroom counterparts. Now, I made a list. I checked it twice. Because I was interviewing Richard Riakporhe. I don't know if you've seen it. It's on the channel. Interviewed him in depth. Really good interview, actually. He opened up on a lot of stuff. But he was one of the first to start this controversy, if you like, when he was withdrawn from purse bids to challenge Jai Opetaia at the time, who was co-promoted by Matchroom, and Riakporhe, of course, with Boxxer. Riakporhe says in the interview that he can completely endorse Boxxer's decision now, although he got a lot of flack for it unfairly. But he can endorse it now because he's got a chance on home soil against Chris Billam-Smith, someone he's beaten previously as well. A winnable fight, he will think. So he can understand why they withdrew him from the Opetaia bids. But yeah, I was making a list, and he was the second of, I think, 5. Let me just find the list. Because I sent the list over to Eddie Hearn because I knew if anyone would have an exhaustive list of the times this has happened, it would be him. And it's fair to say that Eddie has a very hit and miss attitude to responding to my text messages on WhatsApp. And I wasn't fully expecting a reply, but I guess talking about this particular subject almost guaranteed one. So I said, late notice purse bid pullouts, Fraser Clark, Richard Riakporhe, Adam Azim, Isaac Chamberlain. Have I missed any out? And he said, Dubois versus Ferreira. Although that's not quite true because it didn't actually make it to purse bids. Although it is true to say that Caroline Dubois was withdrawn from Boxxer from contention for the world title held by Beatriz Ferrara. But the others, Fraser Clark was pulled out from the Fabio Wardley purse bids, and then ultimately ended up fighting Wardley a couple of fights further down the line and got a draw. So maybe that was the right decision. Riakporhe, who we've mentioned, Adam Azim against Dalton Smith, actually vacated his European title rather than fight Dalton Smith. I wonder how the Boxxer sold that one to him. And now looks like he might be fighting Harlem Eubank. Isaac Chamberlain was the most recent. He was lined up to defend his British title at cruiserweight against Chevon Clark, the matchroom fighter in this case, and decided not to. Chamberlain may have a case if he now goes on to take up his own mandatory shot at the European champion, Sislak, who we know quite well over here. But if he ends up fighting another Boxxer contender in Vidal Riley, the public may be less forgiving. Ayman, it's not only the fact that they're pulling fighters out of purse bids, because you, as a promoter, you have to do what you feel is best for your fighters. It's two other things. One, that it always seems to be against matchroom fighters, and Ben Shalom has said publicly he'd like to be able to work with matchroom one day. They're the only ones he seems to have a problem working with over time. They've worked with Queensbury and so on. But the other issue is how late they tend to pull their fighters out of contention. It seems to often be hours before the purse bids are due to be opened. What do you make of it all? Because I don't want it to just be, I'm giving Boxxer a bit of a, shellacking here. What's your kind of take on this pattern that has emerged?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting because I know you can draw a pattern there, but are these all really just kind of individual cases as they are for boxers, their own individual careers and what's kind of best for them? A couple of these as well too are Isaac Chamberlain. He's a Boxxer promoted, but really he's a Hennessy fighter. So that was really Hennessy's decision, I guess. There, what's going on with Tyler Denny? He's a Boxxer fighter, right? Or at least he's fought under the Boxxer banner. But that fight with Felix Cash is happening, as far as we understand it, on a matchroom show. So there seems to be something's being ironed over at least, or something you can be showed there that it can work and works under the right circumstances. I just guess in this occasion, they were able to find a deal that was palatable to everyone, and on the other ones, they haven't really. I would say on the case of Dalton Smith versus Adam Azim, I've said it before, I wasn't really interested in that fight on this occasion, although we all hate the idea of marinations and things, and I'm not a big fan of that either. But I just felt that it wasn't the right time for that fight. The other, without going through all those fights individually, the other thing to question is it Boxxer and Ben Shalom, who we've seen beforehand actually in a press conference with Frank Warren before Eddie Hearn did it, when it was Joe Parker versus Joe Joyce, and he took a bit of a shellacking there from Warren as being the young gun there, but he was shown keen to want to make these deals with other promotions and followed through with his word there. Is it Ben Shalom or is it more Sky? Because Eddie Hearn's kind of thrown the dart towards Sky in some of his interviews and said that, when we were exclusive with Sky Sports, we were questioning why are they giving promotion or talking about other big fights, and to paraphrase, Sky was saying, well, they're big fights and we should have a presence there. And since Eddie Hearn has left Sky Sports, DAZN and Sky Sports and Eddie Hearn's fight specifically aren't getting as much spotlight as maybe they thought he would get, because Sky were giving the spotlight to other fights during his tenure. So is it a directive from Sky actually, as opposed to Boxxer? Are Ben's hands tied? I don't really know what the full situation is there, but I kind of tend to feel that in amongst all the back and forth between Boxxer and Matchroom, Frank Smith, who's pulling a lot of the strings right now, and Ben Shalom, I know he's made a few trip-ups, are fairly level-headed people. And whilst there is the clamour and the loud noise from Eddie Hearn, who is very much someone who you can be, what's the word I'm looking for, who is very convincing in his arguments, I do feel that these are just separate occasions where the business hasn't been right. And the business isn't right for some of the Sky leading lights who they're trying to turn into pay-per-view faces, which they need right now. They can't quite pull the trigger on that because these aren't the fights where the commercial reward is there for it, because the risk means that they won't get the reward later down the line.
Well, I've got a couple of points to make on that, but let's just go to the chat briefly. DB Cooper One's got a few here. He says, Ayman is a good chat, but it'll never be great till he watches Snatch. That's with a capital S. Flexen, how can you work in boxing without watching that? I mean, I've watched it, so I'm not sure quite why you're addressing it to me, but maybe it's a generational thing. I mean, I've watched Snatch. I watched The Gentleman recently as well, which is actually quite good. But Ayman, could you be compelled to watch Snatch?
I've got like a whole list of movies that I've got to watch and got to get to, and I just never kind of get to them at the moment. So
do you see them as like old movies, like classic movies?
When was Snatch? When did it come out? 2001?
Yeah, probably around that.
Isn't it like an Essex type of film sort of thing?
Well, it's more like a British gangster film.
Wait, is it got
Brad Pitt?
Is it Brad Pitt?
He plays the gypsy boxer.
No, I've seen it.
Oh, you have seen it?
I have seen it.
Oh, DB Cooper One's going to be doing cartwheels.
Yeah, no, I have seen it.
Oh, well, there you go. Did you like it?
Right.
It was all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's hope Guy Ritchie's not watching. I'd be interested. What did you say? Oh, Shalom Mofos. That's DB Cooper One as well. That's a what's it called? Reference. Evid Marion, Lee Francis, his thing. Oh, why has it gone out my mind? That's probably before your time as well, Ayman.
Oh, you're talking about Bo Selector?
That's it, Bo Selector. Is that something you
bit before my time? It was like I was past the watershed where I was, we were allowed to watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, because that happened at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. into 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. and that was our cut off of bedtime, so that was too late in the night for us.
I used to love Bo Selector, especially Mel B. If you ever get a chance to watch it, Ayman, anyone else in the chat who's too young to have watched it first time around, look at the Mel B character. Would not be allowed now. Would be absolutely cancelled. But yeah, she was on some of the episodes later on as well, so she obviously didn't have a problem with it. But yeah, you wouldn't get away with it in 2024. Sultan and Bragimov, ever since the brown paper bag story came out, haven't had enough to bid. Gary, Ayman watches Harry Potter and Avengers weekly. Is that true, Ayman?
I watched the Harry Potter series heading into Christmas last year. Don't like Avengers or superhero movies at all. There's too much about them, and they've also killed off the comedy film industry as well too. That's a conversation for another day. So I stay away from superhero films completely.
That's a big shout. Okay, but yeah. So the point I was going to make on the whole Boxxer and Matchroom thing, one is that why do they always do it so late in the day? Because yeah, individually there might be good reasons to withdraw these fighters from purse bids on each occasion. But do they have to leave it right up until the last minute? That does seem like a bit trolling at best. And the other thing is, fighters are tending to get a lot of the criticism that goes with this. You know, Adam Azim being either told to or deciding in his own right to tweet saying he will fight Dalton Smith one day, don't worry about it, and all of this stuff. You know, they're the ones who are the kind of lightning rod for these criticisms that perhaps should be better aimed at Boxxer. And I think from a PR standpoint, Boxxer or Sky Sports, if it is their directive, one of the two entities could help their fighters by putting a statement out when these occasions occur and just saying, look, we don't think this is the right fight at the right time. He would love to take the fight, or she, in the case of Dubois. They'd love to take the fight, but we're not going to let them. It's our decision. And, you know, just shield them from the criticism. But they haven't done that. And you mentioned Tyler Denny there and fighting on a Matchroom show. I'm not sure what Tyler's... We interviewed him recently, so I'll have to watch it again. But I'm not sure what his current situation is with Boxxer. But if you're saying to, let's think of an example, Richard Riakporhe, back when they pulled him out of the Jai Opetaia purse bids, if you're Ben Shalom, you're saying to him, look, Rich, I'm sorry you've had all this criticism, but you've got to realise Jai Opetaia is in great form. If we lose the purse bid, you have to go over to fight him in Australia. Not ideal. However, you've beaten Chris Billam-Smith. He's in the same stable. It's an easy fight to make. Once he wins the world title, you'll get the first shot. Easy kind of rationale to make. Riakporhe undoubtedly accepted it and now gets his reward. If that tells Riakporhe, we really care about you, we've got your best interests at heart, which I think it does, what does it say to Tyler Denny and those like him who are allowed to fight on another promoter show? Surely that says we don't care about you as much as we care about the likes of Riakporhe, Fraser Clark, and so on. And for us in the media, we'll say, well, probably true, you know, they're going to make a lot more money for Boxxer than a Tyler Denny, all due respect, or a Dan Aziz or whoever. but it doesn't make it right for the fighter, does it? And, you know, that would be a relationship you'd be questioning. What do you think?
So yeah, a couple of points in return. Again, I'm not Boxxer's spokesperson here.
Well, they need a spokesperson. You could tell us why it's them who are avoiding the purse bids and not the fighters.
Well, was it not the whisper within the industry that someone new has been hired? Is that right, Danny?
Yes, they have hired a new director of comms, director of communications, who's come with a really credible background, actually. His name escapes me at the moment, but it is public knowledge now. But someone from the industry who used to work in marketing for one of the major promoters was really impressed by the hire. This could be just what Ben Shalom and Boxxer need, actually.
Well, putting that aside, just on the point regarding, taking their time. First of all, I believe that Ben Shalom, I think it is the case. Ben Shalom comes from a legal background and having worked in the legal industry. I remember that when you had timelines and timescales to do things ordered by the courts and such. And again, I know this is business. It's not legal, although the legal crossover can happen. If you had 14 days to negotiate, if you have 28 days to negotiate, you take those 28 days and you negotiate and you have the order, whatever it is, on that final day. Maybe Ben Shalom's carrying over some of those practices into this side of the business, as that's his way of doing. So I can sort of see as maybe that's why some of the lateness, I guess, in inverted commas, comes in. Also, as well, I think it's been said in interviews beforehand, Frank Smith said he was in conversation with Ben Shalom. They told him of their intentions, that they're likely not to go through with the purse bid. So if they have those conversations behind the scenes and they've been told of what's the likely process and path as to what the other side are going to do, those without prejudice conversations, you have an understanding, you have an inkling as to what's going to happen. So can you really kind of make the loud noise that you're making when you understand to a large degree as to what the situation is going to be? The other flip side as well too with Tyler Denny is I'm doing this spin here for the promoter. Maybe you're so confident that you don't matter where the fight happens and what promotion it happens as well. You see as a Tyler Denny, you don't have to take the risk. You don't have to pay the risk either too, because the other side they can have.
But then does that mean that the likes of Fraser Clark and Richard Riakporhe need the protection that Tyler Denny doesn't?
Potentially, but it's also too.
This can't be a win-win, surely.
No. You're right. You're true. And I imagine what really this case is, they'll look at really whose ceiling is higher. With the heavyweights, it's different because you never know who really gets to the top until they get to the top. And Fraser Clark has that Olympic pedigree, and you can take the chance when the riches are higher. Tyler Denny's not really from a favored area. I know that because I'm from a similar area here in the West Midlands too. They might see European as his limit, and if again he does punch above his weight as he has done to achieve, and it's a brilliant achievement from Tyler Denny. Will not diminish what he's done at all. He's flying the flag here, as a number of fighters are doing in the West Midlands. You might see this as a fight where we say, you know what, we've done what we can for you here. We've taken you. We're very proud of our achievements, and they should be proud of their achievements. But this might be the end of the road for us for now, unless something changes. So maybe they've done their dice rolls and they were happy to roll the dice elsewhere. Maybe the resources just aren't there to keep Tyler Denny on, and they rather funnel the resources at other places. Pun not intended there. But yeah, those are maybe some of the reasons as to why Boxxer might make that decision. But I just think with these sort of things, I know that there is the back and forth between the two, but I do generally just feel these are just individual cases.
And it's Dan Humphreys is the new director of communications for Boxxer. I just had to quickly search through my WhatsApp. Dan Humphreys. So he'll have to challenge Dan Barnard to find out, there can only be one Dan in boxing media communications. It's such a niche industry. So we'll see who comes out on top in that one. My money's on Barnard, but then I haven't seen much of Humphreys yet. Just before we let you go, we did put out a poll at the start of the show. Who should Ryan Garcia fight next? And that's complete now. 165 votes, which is pretty good for us. Other got 14% and came last, which is good because we didn't get too many comments on who and why. Third place, Boots Ennis, which is the preferred route apparently for Ryan Garcia. So that's a shame. Conor Benn, second on 27%. I'm sure he'll be heartened by that. But number one, and perhaps surprisingly, given the general tenor of the live chat posts, is a rematch with Devin Haney, which has got 34%. And so while people are saying there's no point to a rematch and Garcia was dominant, it does seem like a majority of you, albeit, a small majority, but a majority nonetheless, want to see a Haney rematch. And I'm among them. I quite fancy that too.
Yeah, look, given the promotion, so I was just reading some of the chats, the comments in the chat. One of them took my eye, so I was just having a little read. But yeah, look, when the promotion was so great, when the foils for Garcia's behavior was perfectly played as well too, from Haney's perspective, because he was so dumbfounded by it as well. You want to see something like that again. You want to capture that lightning in a bottle again. And their rivalry has been storied before they even got into the professional game, before even this fight happened over the weekend in the 3-3 score that they had between the two. So who doesn't want to see a good story happen again where rivals come back together down the line? We don't know what state Garcia will be in. We don't know what state Haney will be in the future. So completely understand. I'm one of those again who can count myself. If I was voting in that poll, I would have picked the same in Devin Haney.
That's because we know our shit, mate. That's why. So live's where it's at. Guys, really appreciate you watching. If you haven't already, please give us a like. Please give us your subscribe. And if you're watching on playback rather than live, you've missed out on the live chat, which is honestly one of the highlights of the show. However, please do leave some comments underneath and we will respond to some of those as well. We'll be back next Monday at 4 p.m. as usual, but we really appreciate you all tuning in. Yeah, thanks very much. And we'll see you soon. Ayman, the closing remarks go to you.
Yeah, much more boxing content coming your way. We'll have all the fallout from Haney versus Garcia as we covered it throughout the week heading into it. So make sure to keep tuned in to Seconds Out. We've also got all the lowdown coming up for the Liverpool show, Matchroom Boxing back in Liverpool, always entertaining. Danny, as well, as it's good to have you back here. Did you know as well too that we're on Spotify? Have you heard? Have you listened?
I've done both. I've heard and listened, and they're not actually the same thing, hearing and listening, as I tell my son on quite a regular basis. But yeah, we are on Spotify. We're also on, it's not called iTunes anymore, is it? Apple Music, Amazon, anywhere you can get your podcast, we're on there. So please search SO Live. If you're just catching the end of this and you'd rather listen to it, you've looked at Ayman and I and thought, God, I can't stand looking at those faces for an hour. Feel free to listen to it on the podcast instead. But yeah, thank you very much.
But most of all, before we sign out, thank you to everyone in the chat as well too. In these high moments when we're coming out from such a great event, it's great to see you guys here interacting and giving us your comments. On the lower weeks, as we have too, there's a strong core of you guys. We'd love to have a few more of you in as well. So make sure you're tuning in next week as well too and get your comments and questions in. The debate and stuff rumbles on, the good conversation rumbles on between me and Danny. So we'd love to have you guys here on board. So thank you for joining. Thank you once again to Vinny as well too in the background. We'll see you guys on the next one.